Today's episode, if you are missing out, is sponsored by Fiverr. You may know Fiverr as the preferred source for freelance services, but did you know that they also provide online courses as well? Learn from Fiverr is an online, on-demand video classes platform specially tailored for freelancers and professionals. All classes are taught by top experts who are distinguished in their fields. These courses contain practical and comprehensive knowledge. By taking the course, you'll level up your skills and grow professionally. And by successfully passing the course's final quiz, you'll showcase your new capabilities. And the best part? Pay only for courses you want to take, with no monthly fees. Visit our show notes for more information to see if there's a Learn from Fiverr course for you. Every course you enroll in using our link goes directly to making this show better. Thank you for your support.
And now, on with the show.
Gentlemen, you guys are both writers. I want to know a script that you admire because you know that you yourself could never write it.
I was thinking about this, and I think my answer is going to maybe sound a bit silly because it's the answer. It's the kind of script that every person who goes to film school, or most guys that go to film school, think they could write, which is Reservoir Dogs. And I think that my reasoning for that is that I could never write a movie like that. I could never write a story like that because, I've mentioned on this show before my sort of aversion to what I call tough guy movies, and there is this thing of like the idea for me to sit down and write about a bunch of crooks doing a heist and attacking a cop and everybody doesn't trust each other and they use code names and they quote pop culture and all of that stuff. To me, like, I think if I was sitting down to try and write that, I would spend so much time going, this is nonsense. Like, this is play pretend time. This is silly. And I would not have the confidence to do that. And there are many guys that have tried to do that, have tried to do their own Reservoir Dogs or Pulp Fiction or what have you. And they have shown what a fool's errand it is. But then you actually watch Reservoir Dogs and it's incredible how he pulls it off. It never, despite having so many opportunities to go off the rails, that script never feels silly or performative or nonsensical. Like it just works so well despite having every opportunity to come apart or feel pretentious or full of itself. It never does that. So I think it's just something I look at and it's just it gets toned so perfect in a way I never could.
I could never write this if you paid me $1 million and gave me 1,000 lifetimes to fucking try to write this script. I look at it and think it's a great script and it's funny as hell. I couldn't write Clueless. I couldn't do it. I always think I can't write comedies for the most part. I could always put comedy in other things, but like an outright just comedy doesn't seem like my strongest suit. And about teenage girls and about Southern California, that whole vibe, just not my thing. I think I'm too, not even toot my own horn, but like I'm too masculine to like get into that teenage girl mindset, and I'm too much of a grimy heavy metal freak to be into like the preppy Southern California thing. I'm too East Coast. So, and it is just a great script. It's an amazing movie. They should have just stopped trying to remake Emma. I mean, like, Clueless did it. Don't do it again. So, sorry, Anya Taylor-Joy, but, yeah, my pick's Clueless.
Every year since 1989, the Library of Congress has selected 25 films to add to the National Film Registry. The criteria? The films must be culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant.
Each week on You're Missing Out, we take a look at one of these films to try and get to the heart of why they were selected and why they still matter.
This week, Phil Iscove returns to kick off Season 3 with the 1974 neo-noir Chinatown.
Our guest today, returning to the show for a third time, the first person to return to the show for a third time, continuing his every season tradition of being our inaugural episode. We are joined once again by the, I guess we'll say, former host of Podcasts Like It's 1999, now current host of Podcasts Like It's 1992, our dear friend and podcast buddy Phil Iscove joins us again to talk about Chinatown. Phil, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. That was a very solemn way of starting this episode.
That's
It
always
seemed like
how it starts.
Oh, is that how it? Okay. It
I
always sounds like that? It always sounds like
always.
you're at my funeral.
What are you talking about, Phil? You listen to every episode, I'm sure. And you know.
It was a little funereal, is all I'm getting at. But I appreciate the sentiment. The sentiment's great. The tone could be a little bit bigger.
Okay,
for
fine.
future
Hang
reference.
on. I'm gonna do another take. You ready? We are so jacked to talk about
That's what I'm
Roman Polanski, and
Well,
Phil Iscove is joining us to talk about Roman.
That was not what I was getting at.
And
I
this
also
is my
just
point,
want to
though.
say
I wanted to keep it a little scholarly because we know where we're going with this.
Coming to you from a hot tub in Roman Polanski's house.
Oh my god. That is not where we're coming from. And I want to just get ahead of this right now, okay? I want to say this. I'm going to speak for myself. You guys can speak for yourselves as we continue down this road. My enjoyment of this film in no way endorses Roman Polanski as a human being. I think Roman Polanski is a bad person. Not good. Don't do it. This is a great movie. We're going to talk about how great this movie is. I think that he has made great movies. I think he can be a great director. We talked about Polanski in 99 with his film The Ninth Gate, with also totally not problematic Johnny Depp. Just a real whatever. I just want to be very clear with all of your listeners, because when you sent me the list, you might remember our exchange, Mike. You sent me the list, and I looked at the list, and I was like, I mean, yeah, I want to talk about Chinatown, but I don't want to talk about Roman Polanski. And your response was, fuck it, let's do Chinatown, essentially, right? Like, someone was going to do it, and obviously we're going to talk about it at some point. And I was like, as long as we can just say that Roman Polanski is a bad dude up top, I'm fine with it.
I want to correct that a bit, Phil.
Okay.
Because no, I want to give you credit. You were like, okay, I want to do China, but I don't know the Roman Polanski at all. And I sent you a paragraph kind of talking about our ethos on the show, which is true. Like, we have to talk about all of these films, and that film is such a collaborative medium that to reduce it to just one individual is just a poor way to view any medium, and that we're only going to address the problematic elements when it applies to the work and all that. And then about maybe an hour later, I got a response from you, and you were the one that said, fuck it, let's do Chinatown. It was, you responded to it as though it was like, asking your friend, like, I don't know, should we go skydiving? Yeah, I guess. Fuck it, let's do it. Before my courage fades again, I'm just lock it in now.
Well, because it's just, I was looking at the list, and I was just like, and I've said this to you guys before on the previous 2 episodes that I've been on, which is that, I am, despite the fact that I did go to film school, I am not a film scholar by any stretch of the imagination. There's any number of blind spots in my film viewing. And because of the nature of your podcast, a large swath of these early films that you're talking about are just films that I just can't talk about. Yeah, or I could talk about, but I feel like I'm not as passionate to talk about, I guess would be the best way to put it. And this jumped out on the list, and I was like, I mean, how do I not talk about fucking Chinatown? So I guess we're talking Chinatown.
Phil coming in with a hot take that Roman Polanski's not a good guy. That really a great way to start this podcast. Really alienating our listenership over here at Ben Shapiro's network.
It is but like that is one of those things I have to say, and we're gonna get into the film more, but we gotta we'll just tackle the Polanski of it all now up at the top. But the thing about the Polanski situation, when it comes to the actual conversation about his court case and his flight from America, there are a lot of,
I think, would be fleeing the crime scene.
Yeah, well, but this is the thing. There are a lot of complications and nuances to that conversation regarding the judge and the case and the sentencing, and especially the current day opinions of his victim. But the one thing is, as opposed to some of these controversial Hollywood figures where anybody can sit back and where there are people who can kind of go, well, it's a question of, I believe this person and I believe this person. The thing about Polanski is he did that shit. Like, that's not a question. He did an awful, horrendous thing.
Yep.
That is that's the thing that people think. That's never in question.
No.
Whatever comes after, with regard to whatever came before, with regard to the trauma he suffered and all of that gets brought up in the psychological reports, and whatever comes after,
Yeah.
in terms of the way the judge acted and the ethics of all of that. There's no arguing of that incident. So,
No, I mean,
bad guy, no argument there.
it should be said, and again, like, none of this is condoning his behavior, but a tragic life has been lived by Roman Polanski. His family all murdered during the Holocaust. His wife and unborn child murdered in his home. Like, these are bad things that I imagine would fuck you up. But they in no way condone his behavior necessarily, as to what he did since.
There's a weird thing to like that makes me really dislike him even more. Is that I don't think he's truly like regretful or anything about what he did, which is because
not at all.
Well, no, but here's the weird thing, and I feel like I'm the only one who ever remembers this, is that he shows up in Rush Hour 3 and sexually assaults the two heroes. Which is like, okay, Roman, that's
also
really a decision.
But also classic Brett Ratner move.
I mean,
absolute classic Brett Ratner move.
Look,
he definitely went up to Roman and be like, "Hey, man, been in that situation before, bro. Bitches can't handle a hot tub. You know what I mean?"
It's like, no, I mean, like it's a complicated thing. Now, obviously, the film we're discussing was made prior to that specific crime. It happens to fall in between the murder of Sharon Tate and the sexual assault. And again, folks can absolutely look up the Roman Polanski Wanted and Desired documentary if they want to get a view on that on that scenario. And
I think it's also worth noting too, for what it's worth. And again, this is not, I'm sorry that we started your episode this way, because it is obviously it's a bit of a complicated bummer way to start it, but I do think it's important that we get this all out of the way so that we can discuss the film. I think part of it too, or at least the kind of grossness that's felt, is seeing him win Best Director in 2002, seeing Hollywood, the Academy at large, also willing to turn a blind eye towards this crime, is complicated as well, right? Like, this is what we're really trying to do here, is an endless debate that I imagine we will have until the end of time, which is the separation of art versus artist. Can you separate these two things? I have a friend who firmly believes that is possible, and that the art should speak for itself, and the person that made it should, be separated. I think that's hard to do, but
it's hard to do with a movie where sexual assault plays a gigantic part of the third act of the movie. It's
correct.
There's no way to we're not going to talk about it the whole fucking episode, but like, it's not something you can ignore in this case, because it's not like The Ninth Gate or even like Rosemary's Baby or whatever, which is about a woman's like place in the world and how she's literally turned into the devil's fucking baby receptacle. It's like, no, this is a movie about rape and sexual assault, and how in this movie he lands firmly on the side of rape, no good, very bad, don't do it, which we then find out maybe not necessarily his opinion.
I mean, I think it's important to address with that, and Phil's talking about, separating the art from the artist. Couple things with that, which is number one, I think when it comes to the Academy honoring him, for the pianist back in the day, that's a complicated. People are still talking about that letter that all the people in Hollywood signed about that, which is a very complicated situation. Well, but this is the thing. I mean, look, there are certain. I'm not going to get into it here. There's certain signatures you go, oh, interesting, you decided to sign this, and one in particular that I always go, weird you're attached to this, because it seems like in a different lane you've got a very different approach, and it's weird you're back in this anyway.
Yes.
But that does come out of the fact that, again, what gets brought up in that Roman Polanski Wanted and Desired thing and all that is, by the time the 2000s roll around, the woman he assaulted, now a woman, was a child at the time, came out and was very critical of the justice system at the time. and the way that the prosecution may have presented evidence to the judge in an improper way, and the way that the sentencing was done. I mean, to get into it a little bit, essentially, like, California in its famous justice system of the 1970s, essentially came down to like, well, we decided that Roman is going to go for a psych evaluation, and if the psych evaluation determines he's not a danger, then that's that, and if it determines he is, then it is, but it's all going to come down to the psych evaluation. Then he goes for the psych evaluation, and the story goes that after the judge was hounded and changed his mind, essentially, and went, no, we're still gonna, so they say, the judge came out and goes, no, we're still gonna get him. That psych evaluation is meaningless and XYZ. And so Roman flees. So at the time that 2000s thing rolls around, there is a conversation around, like, because his victim was saying the things that she was saying, and also there was more conversation about that judge's behavior with regard to the trial. It seemed like there was a turnaround in the discourse of just kind of it basically was more a reaction to the circumstances rather than the initial crime, and now we're back to focused on the initial crime.
I'll just say this, and as valid as I think all that is, I don't know that we need to parse too deeply into this. I just wanted to kind of put it out there that the three of us are obviously attempting to separate the art from the artist in this respect, and that none of us obviously condone his behavior. It's complicated. I think we could do 4 hours on the complications of this, but I don't think that any of us want to do that. So
No.
I only bring up the 2000s letter. You mentioned the Oscars. I only bring that up because that is the complicated thing with, I mean, for a filmmaker who has often worked in films that deal with murky moral gray areas, the guy is the epitome of murky when it comes to trying to suss out, well, like, people always try and be like, well, bad things happen to him. It's like, yeah, but he did bad things, and that shouldn't excuse that. And I think when it comes to separating the art from the artist, and I'll say this to that because we have a lot of movies to cover like that on this show.
Sure.
Next season, we have to do Birth of a Nation. Like, we've got a lot going on. I don't necessarily believe in separate the art from the artist. What I do believe is the mistake that we're making a lot in the culture today, and I hope that, in our show we try and avoid doing that, is that I think we've gotten away from the idea that bad people can make good art. And I think that the struggle now is so often people kind of turn around and go, well, I don't like that movie, or I don't like this thing, or I don't like that thing's bad. Not just I don't like it. That thing is bad because the person who made it is bad. And it's like, if we continue to do that and decide that we're coding things as good or bad because the people who made it are good or bad, we're starting to lose our ability to be able to tell what people are bad. I think we kind of, if we try and put it in that box, and by that I mean, like, if you start basically going like, no, I can tell if a person is good or bad or not based on the art that they make. Right? Oh, I don't agree with the morals of this artwork, so that means the person is bad.
You're saying two different things.
Well, what I'm saying is the idea of, I think that when people talk about separating the art from the artist, I think you have to take them together, but you also have to be able to acknowledge, like, I can get a visceral enjoyment out of something, or I can enjoy a work of art even if I have problems with the people who made it. You know what I mean?
That's the whole kit and caboodle, right? Which is, can people do that? Some people can, some people can't. I think that, and I would argue that I am a moving target on this. I've had this argument with my friend many, many, many times. He makes it seem incredibly binary. I don't think that it is. I think that there are certain artists, whatever it is, certain actors, certain directors, what have you, where my enjoyment of the film is changed irrevocably because of actions that they've made. Woody Allen's films, he was a huge filmmaker for me. He was an enormous inspiration to me as I was growing up, and sort of finding my voice as a writer and what have you. Very hard to watch his films now. It just is. And whether or not there's legitimacy to the allegations against him or not, these films are tainted now. You can't, if you watch Manhattan now and say that it is not affected by Woody Allen, his actions, who are you kidding? Like it's absolutely absurd to me. So to me, it's not a black and white thing. I wish it was. I wish there was a switch that I could flip inside me and I could watch any film made by any person and not in any way allow that to blur the way that I watch these films. That being said, all of this being said, Chinatown is one of those films where I do find myself watching sort of this, quite frankly, this masterpiece of a movie. And, perhaps it's because I don't have a tremendous affinity for Roman Polanski's filmography. He was not a big filmmaker for me. But when I watch this film, it's hard not to be pretty floored by it. So, take that for what it's worth.
I don't think it's binary either. My feelings on the matter is really just, I think everybody should, everybody can make their own decision about what they're comfortable watching, what they want. The thing that always annoys the shit out of me is basically when it comes to anything with art, which is when people start saying you shouldn't be watching it or you're bad if you watch it, which is just no, don't do that. If you don't like something, more power to you. That's the beauty of art. It's all how you view things. But it's when you start laying down laws about what you, and if you're morally incorrect for doing so. So I'll watch
couldn't agree with you more.
So like I'll watch Polanski's movies, not much, because honestly, other than Chinatown, I don't really give a shit about the guy. I'll watch Mel Gibson's movies, I'll watch Woody Allen movies. For me, I don't know if it's a weird line for me, but like Bill Cosby's the only one I won't deal with any of his art, just because of the rancid, rampant hypocrisy of his entire persona and his art in comparison to what he was as a man. Where it's like, at least when you watch this, it almost feels like when you watch Polanski's movies, at the very least, giving a good faith reading of the man and his art, it almost feels like a bad guy, working through something, even if he doesn't realize it. He didn't do it by the time he made Chinatown, but clearly sex and sexuality and sexual assault were definitely things that weighed heavy on his mind because of the Holocaust, because of what happened to his wife. So to watch this movie and be like, how did the guy that made this go on to do what he did? Does he realize what he was doing when he made Chinatown? Yeah. And the hypocrisy of his actions after it? It's just this... It's almost fascinating, trying to, because I don't think you can always necessarily figure out who a man is or a woman is based on the movies they make.
Totally.
But it does lend this thing of you do try to figure it out. You're like, do they know? Is it was all these decisions subconscious? What's going on? So basically everybody, if you're 20 minutes into this fucking episode at this point, obviously you're okay with Roman Polanski discussions. If you don't want to watch Chinatown, I don't blame you. You're missing out on a fucking masterpiece. Probably Jack Nicholson's best performance, in my opinion. Maybe the best neo-noir of all time.
It's also, I think it might be, I don't know if it's my favorite or the best Jack Nicholson performance, but it certainly feels like it's the quintessential Nicholson performance.
To what Tom just said, where he goes, if you don't want to watch Chinatown, I don't blame you. I'll say this, and listen, I'll take the hit. I do. Insofar as, really, the cinematic medium is so collaborative. And it's the same way when people talk about Woody Allen movies. And I understand when people say, I don't like seeing Woody Allen in his movies or his scripts make me uncomfortable but what I can't stand is when people decide the entire work is bad. It would not matter what Woody Allen has done. None of that diminishes the quality of Diane Keaton's performance in Annie Hall, right? None of it does. And this is the thing with film, is that even if, you have the conversation about Polanski. Now, I think the murky morals and all that fits into Polanski's oeuvre and his worldview, but even if you take the Polanski out of it, none of that affects the fact that Robert Towne wrote the greatest screenplay ever written in Chinatown. And if you come away from the message of what Robert Towne is writing in the script for Chinatown and you go, actually, that's all bullshit, because the guy that told the actors to say the lines was a monster, like, you're missing out on a lot of other aspects of the medium.
And it is, again, a thing of, like, he made it before all of this shit. So, like, if I feel like if I had to, like, have a strict rule about Polanski, my feeling would be, like, everything before it, I think, is, like, I'll watch it, like, okay, like, I don't have that, like, disgusting feeling on myself. Everything after it, I kind of almost can't get past it, because it's like, he shouldn't have been making movies. Like, nobody should have allowed this guy to be making movies. But my thing is, like, I get what Mike's saying. But I do also just understand that there are just things that people can't really, like, get past. And, you know, more power to you. So it really just comes down to me. Let people do whatever the fuck they want. Don't tell me what to do.
Look,
I'm not saying you. I'm not saying you. I'm saying in terms of, like, the overall, like, Polanski canceled artist conversation thing. It's like, everybody just do whatever you want and leave everybody else alone. God damn it. It's like, it's too much.
I'm glad we addressed the Polanski of it all up top, because I don't want people coming into this thinking we have any other kind of approach to it. I'll say this. It's all complicated. All of this is very, you know, I happened to read portions of the book written by the woman involved in the incident, the victim of Polanski, and she did make, I thought, an incredible point in her book, which is people don't appreciate how different the 70s were. And I don't mean that as in, like, no. What she was saying was basically going, like, you don't understand how much the entire apparatus of the 1970s enabled all of this.
Oh, for sure.
She wasn't saying it as in, like, it was a different time, we were cooler about things, just more like, yeah, but there were so many steps along the way of everything that went down where everybody's mentality and attitude was so different then. And it kind of took this, not just this incident. In American history and cultural history, you can see so many moments where all of a sudden we all as a culture had to, like, snap to and go, oh, we let this go too far. Oh, God. You know what I mean? Like, when you talk about the Manson family was the moment where everybody stopped going, you know what? If the young folks want to grow out their hair and do drugs on a compound, let them go. We suddenly went, oh, there's rules for a reason. Oh, God.
When hippies kill. Yeah.
But that's the thing. And, like, with the 70s, there's so much of that. You talked about, Manhattan or any of that. Like, the 70s mentality was very, and that whole est mentality and all of that was very much like, you know what? Children are just young adults, man. Give them a cigarette or a drink at whatever age they want. They can make decisions for themselves. We're all just people, man. And then, like, shit like this happens, and suddenly, like, by the 80s, America went, no, we had rules for a reason. That's why we had these
everything
systems
out in the 80s. You're right, Mike. America got it all figured out.
I'm saying the 80s and its conservative boom was a reaction to,
of course,
the 60s and 70s going, hey, man, no rules, man. It's all oppressive. It's all held us back. And then suddenly the 80s going, no, guys, no, I think we had some of these rules for a reason. I think we figured some of this stuff out. Anyway, all of that.
Chinatown.
Before we talk any more about Chinatown, and presumably a lot about the script, because I have to imagine that's a large part of why you are here.
The actual movie.
Yes, the actual movie. Let's talk about what the National Film Registry had to say about Chinatown.
Sure.
Here's what the Library of Congress had to say. A compelling whodunit reminiscent of Raymond Chandler or Dashiell Hammett, Chinatown was among the most renowned films of the 70s and holds up impeccably today, thanks to an Oscar-winning script by Robert Towne, flawless direction by the unconventional Roman Polanski, and gorgeous cinematography by John A. Alonzo. A Los Angeles private detective, Jack Nicholson, hired to investigate an adultery case, stumbles onto a labyrinthine plot of a murder involving incest and the privatization of water through government corruption and shady real estate deals that incriminate some of the city's most powerful tycoons. Ultra-glamorous Faye Dunaway is the widow of the murdered water commissioner Nicholson's investigating, and John Huston is her father, with more than his share of secrets. That's a really
sure it's labyrinthian, but sure.
It says labyrinthine in this, Phil. I am thrown after all of that preamble we did that the descriptive they chose for Polanski was unconventional.
Yeah, I mean that's a fair assessment of the movie, I guess.
Yeah,
they definitely describe the movie.
They do
describe the movie.
Yeah, But
no real reason for why it's inducted other than a synopsis.
well, you know, I'll say this. First off, they early on are synopsis. The other thing is, remember, this is 1991 that this gets inducted, right?
Right.
And this movie, one of the things I kind of want to see if we can figure out how to convey this to people. It's maybe hard to understand what this movie was in the 70s. Like that this was essentially like it was a throwback period piece. It was a neo-noir, but it also starred like two of the biggest, hottest stars in Hollywood. This was a hit. Chinatown ended up being what Robert Evans thought The Great Gatsby was going to be. Because Evans tries to get Robert Towne, we'll touch on this, but Evans tries to get Robert Towne to write the adaptation of The Great Gatsby, which eventually stars Redford and Mia Farrow, and is kind of fine. It's okay.
It's boring.
Yeah, it's boring as shit. It's fine. But he thinks that's going to be a hit, and instead Towne's like, no, I've got this idea for Chinatown. And you know, I mean, to watch it now, you do still get that feeling of what it must have been like in, 74 when people were just blown away by this thing.
You bring up the Robert Evans thing, which I think is interesting. I actually just recently, my roommate had never seen The Kid Stays in the Picture.
Oh, yeah.
So I rewatched that relatively recently, probably, I don't know, a couple weeks ago. And hearing Evans say, like, I read the script for Chinatown. I didn't understand it, but I knew it was brilliant.
That was
just
Bob.
like, it's a testament, I think, to him as a producer that obviously that this film becomes what it becomes, right? I mean, I think that he reads this script, it obviously, to everything you just alluded to, Mike, like it's checking all of these old neo-noir, film noir boxes. It's an LA movie, like it's a Hollywood movie on top. Like it's just doing so many things that I'm sure Evans tapped into, but also was just like didn't really get the twists and turns. I'm sure he probably lost the thread a couple times, but was like, well, this is obviously brilliant, so let's do this. But like, talk about Hollywood in a nutshell, right? Like, script lands on your desk that you don't really understand, which means it must be brilliant.
Well, I mean,
is kind of amazing.
I mean, I should note, and listen, if we're gonna talk Bob Evans, I have some of his neckties and a turtleneck sitting over here. I can pull those out at any minute.
Okay, great.
I bought them from his estate sale, and it's the happiest I've ever been.
You want to see me? You want to see me break Mike's brain a little bit?
Oh God.
Okay, we are further away from Chinatown than Chinatown was from the setting.
And Chinatown was from the setting. Yeah, no, that feels right.
It's insane.
It's terrible.
40 years between the 30s and 1974. We are coming up on 50 years of Chinatown.
Well, it's funny you should say that, because today I saw somebody tweet this, which I thought was interesting. They were watching Poker Face. I don't know if you guys have seen the pilot or watched it.
Haven't watched it yet, but I'm meaning to.
It's great. And there is a moment in it where Pulp Fiction is playing in the background. And it does actually make sense as to like what they're saying and how it connects to the story. But all that being said, this person tweeted and was like, "Why is Pulp Fiction in this?" Oh, right, I'm old. Like, there's that movie, obviously 1994. I mean, that is 30 years ago now. And I think that similarly to what you're talking about here, Tom, like, yeah, I mean, these things that the gaps that they have in the commentary that they have doesn't necessarily change. We just get older. It's just
well, and it's also the thing of you kind of, especially something like Chinatown.
Yeah,
you kind of lose perspective for when it came out, because not just because it's a period piece, right? Yep. And that's one thing, but also, forget it, Jake. It's Chinatown is such an immortal line right from the jump that, like, when
and misquoted constantly.
Yes. But when we're coming up as kids, right? Like, and I'm looking at those AFI lists and those countdowns, it's not just that it's a popular line. It's that it's already up there with Here's Looking at You, Kid, or We'll Always Have Paris, right? And films from only like 5 or 6 or 7 years later are still treated as like modern classics, but Chinatown just so instantly becomes that landmark.
It's also, it should be said too. So I came on here for Sunset Boulevard, one of the greatest movies about Hollywood that's ever been made, also a noir. You hit play on this movie, and just from the credits, you're just like, oh fuck, man. Like you're just like you're so in. And I would even go as far as to say that the color choices, the palette, and the look of the credits, and that sort of old faded photo from the sun, the kind of browning that it has, is throughout the entire movie. Like
Yeah.
from literally the Paramount logo, you at least I think you completely understand the aesthetic. You understand everything about this movie from the first minute and a half just in the credits alone. It's pretty unbelievable.
It's one of these things too, and I wrote this in my notes. I was going to bring it up later, but I'll bring it up now. I have a real problem with a lot of neo noir. I can't get into it, and I love Chinatown, and I think part of it is you watch Chinatown and you realize what so many of these others are missing, which is Chinatown understands that doing an homage to noir films, doing a neo noir, means embracing the style and the cinematic language of the noir film, which is why we love those old noir films, rather than I think so many of these people who go, I'm making a neo noir, and that means I don't have to work too hard on my script because I'm just going to use these archetypes. You know what I mean? Like, there's so many things where,
Sure.
so many things where you go like, oh, you got to check out this neo noir, and what it really is it's like, well, this guy, he's hard boiled, and this dame, she's gonna get a smacking, and like all of that. And it's like that's not what made the noir films
No, for sure.
special. We did Maltese Falcon on this show, and
Sure.
that feels so far removed from so many people's stereotypes of noir films, but that's what makes it work.
A couple of things came to mind as you were speaking there. The first was, on our podcast 1992, podcast like it's 1992, there is sort of this you're right in the sort of peak erotic 90s, right? You're right in the center of sort of Basic Instinct, Final Analysis, The Hand That Rocks the Cradle, Consenting Adults. Like the list is long, damage of sort of adult thrillers that existed then, right? And I think that a few years previous, you have Body Heat. Then you've got sort of 9.5 Weeks, and then it all kind of, I would argue that Esther has just drives it into a ditch, and then it's the end of the road for all that shit. But it does feel like all that's an offshoot of this film in a lot of ways, right? This is sort of the tip of the spear of people, and no one even comes close to doing it as well as this film. I would argue maybe the only movie that does it is LA Confidential, and it's still a pastiche. I love LA Confidential, but it's as close to as it tries to be Chinatown is maybe the most kind of the right way to put it. And I love LA Confidential. That's not me knocking LA Confidential, but LA Confidential doesn't exist without Chinatown, doesn't exist with all the other movies that come before Chinatown. But that gap that exists between Chinatown and LA Confidential, where you're seeing all of these kind of sex femme fatale movies, right? Movies where women are screwing over men in some way or another, with everything you're kind of talking about, Mike, of these kind of hard-boiled guys and really hot dames that are all that kind of shit misses the point almost entirely, and none of that stuff is as complex as this movie is. But the other thing that comes to mind, I listened to the Robert Town David Fincher commentary on the Blu-ray, which anyone who, I don't know, cares about movies in any way, shape, or form should listen to. It's amazing. I would argue that David Fincher does the best commentaries of any filmmaker. He somehow finds a way to shit on the movie that he's talking about lovingly, and to talk about like why he would have shot it a different way. But like all that stuff is and like for his own movies, he's telling you kind of funny stories about all that's, he's the best. But in this, he talks about obviously how much he loves this film, and I couldn't help but think of kind of the neo-noirness in his movies, right? Like I think that you see it in Seven, you see it in Zodiac, you can see it in Gone Girl, you can see it, like there is this hard-boiled neo-noir deconstructionist at his heart, and it's clear that like it started with this movie.
And I think that part of what it does, and I was thinking about this recently because last night, this will be ages ago when this episode comes out, but last night I went to go see EO, the Polish film that's up for the Oscar, which is a remake of one of my all-time favorite films, O Hazard Balthazar, by Robert Bresson. And
everyone's favorite movie.
Listen, Phil, they screened that in college, and I broke down in the classroom. Like, that movie is a masterpiece.
I'm having PTSD to our
Rosetta episode.
Rosetta episode.
Oh my god,
classic.
One up.
I mean, I felt
it comes
bad
up a lot.
Mike just
it comes up a lot.
Came in strong and just got bodied by 3
Finally
for 2 hours.
That's fine. I got you back for that. Tom and I got you back for that in your finale on your Magnolia episode, because I joked to Tom that what basically happened is, here's Phil on his Magnolia episode, surrounded in most cases by all of these friends that he's made along the way of this podcast, including celebrities and great writers and all of that, who he has met, in some part over the course of doing this podcast. And then all of a sudden, it's like when a guy, is having his wedding and most of the people are friends he's made in his professional life, but 2 townies show up from his high school days. Because Tom and I roll in and we're like, hey, we knew you from 200 downloads, Phil. It's a boy. And you're just like, oh, don't embarrass me in front of my professional friends.
Yeah, we should have just kicked
you guys.
Zoom.
No. Yeah. Don't act like you're out in front of the 7-Eleven. No. Don't do this.
I remember when you were chasing after the porkers because you couldn't get anything.
I did appreciate Tom saying, what are we doing here?
That lives in my memory when Sarah Polly came into the Zoom chat, and it's in the episode, and it's so fucking funny. It's just like everybody else is going, and Tom just goes, why are we here? Clear as day. That was, I'm sorry, folks, that I derailed our Chinatown discussion, but that was one of the wildest things. There was a point.
I saw the box pop up before her picture, and it just said Sarah Polly, and I'm like, no, what? Why am I in a same? And then her face pops up, and I'm just like, I couldn't say anything other than, why am I here?
To get back to what we initially were talking about here, you were talking about one of your favorite films that made you break down in film class.
So to take us back, correct. I went to see EO last night, and it was the remake of O Hazard Balthazar, and I was very trepidatious because number one, I love O Hazard Balthazar, and number two, it's a very specific movie. Well, it
sounds like a made up name. I'm sorry. I don't mean to be a dick, but it sounds made up.
I hope our most cinephile listeners yell at you on Twitter now.
That's fine. Go for it.
But it's a beautiful film, but it's very, naturalistic and using non-professional actors and all that, the original Bresson film.
Sure.
And I was very nervous about what this would be, a modern remake. And the thing that the director did so well is he basically seemed to look at it as like, well, I love this movie, but rather than try and recreate it or rather than try and warp it, the question is, well, we have all this modern technology now. We have all of these things. How can I do that with this equipment and this technology? How can I do that in this way? And I bring that up with this because when you look at those directors from that era, from the 70s, whether it's Polanski, Coppola, Spielberg, all of these guys around this time, Scorsese, who all love movies and grew up with the classic Hollywood movies. And the ones who do it right are the ones who looked at it and went, okay, I'm not going to make a movie in black and white and grainy and all that. No, the question is like, well, I have all this equipment now. We have these cameras, we have these things, we have this and that, we have this, we can do these kind of things on screen, we can tell these kind of stories. How can I use the tools that I have to make the stuff I grew up loving? Now, sometimes that works out for them, but like Spielberg, the famous example of Spielberg and George Lucas kind of going, oh, I love old adventure serials. Why don't I just make one and it's Indiana Jones? And it's not a one-to-one, but it is, the most like using the tools of the time. Chinatown is the best neo-noir in part because it was an understanding of, well, here's what I love about these movies. You obviously can't do that. EO, it basically sat back and went, okay, well, Bresson had these cameras and this kind of thing. what can I do with drones? Like, how can I tell this donkey story, but now with drones and with digital editing and all of
I mean,
these
who
things?
hasn't thought that, right? Who hasn't
This
had
is
that?
Rosetta
that
2.0,
I mean,
baby.
listen, we all know donkey cinema peaked in Clerks 2.
It's
true.
It really is one of those things to pull back the curtain, Phil, when you were like, hey, we're doing 1992. And I was like, the second film in Abbas Kiarostami's The Coker trilogy came out in 92. And that'd be fun. And you were like, so what about Stay Tuned with
Yeah, no, there.
with the
I
John Ritter
want people to actually
movie?
listen to the podcast, Mike. That's
Oh,
why.
Lord.
I mean, I'll just say this. I agree with what you're saying in the sense that this movie is standing on the shoulders of the genre, right? And saying, how do we do something that hasn't been done before? I do think that the movie is, as Robert Town has expounded upon, it's a commentary about California. It's a commentary about Hollywood in a lot of ways. It's all that kind of stuff is baked into it. I also feel as though, Giddy's character, Jake's character is not particularly hard boiled.
I'm glad you brought that up because I do like I said before, I think this is Nicholson's best performance, and I think it's because they give him such a great character to play, and it's a character that gets right to the heart of what he's the best at. Because you look at the old noirs from the old days, the black and white stuff, the movies with Bogart, say like Sam Spade, he's a cynical asshole, and Giddy's is a cynical asshole, but Bogart plays cynical asshole, and those guys back in the day, cynical asshole meant they were gruff and tough, and they didn't like anybody, and they always tried to just, we're too tough. We put this shield over our hearts because the world fucked us, so we're going to be tough.
Yep.
Giddy's does the same thing of he's clearly an optimist at heart.
Yep.
Otherwise, he wouldn't be putting himself on the line for Faye Dunaway. He wouldn't have done whatever happened in Chinatown when he was a cop. Wouldn't have affected him so deeply if he didn't have a deep, emotional, optimistic heart. But his shield is, I'm going to be a suave, charismatic dickhead. I'm just going to be a smooth-talking guy with my nice suits and my slick-back hair, and I'm just going to be an oily guy. He's not like a dickhead. He's not an asshole. He's a dick.
Yeah, and yes, but also I think you kind of tapped into it in the sense that he has a relatively thin skin.
The scene in the barbershop.
I love that.
The scene in the barbershop. The scene just in when they find Ida Sessions' body. Yeah. And that other cop is like giving him the fucking gears. Like he has to be separated from people on several occasions because there is sort of this thin-skinned component to him that I think is really interesting. Robert Town on the commentary talks about how when he met Nicholson years before, and again, they were both sort of broke. He was a writer and Nicholson was still kind of getting his sea legs and all that. He couldn't believe how indignant Nicholson was about things that just didn't seem worth fighting about. And he was like, that was immediately why he felt that he was so perfect for this role, that he wanted Jake Gittes to have this kind of indignant kind of quality to him. And yet at the same time, as you said, Mike or Tom, there's a heart to this guy. I mean, he puts himself on the line. The end of this movie, obviously ending in Chinatown, and how much what happened fucked him up in the past. He doesn't want to go back there. And then for this horrible thing to happen in Chinatown again, it's like, Fincher says something on the commentary I think is really interesting. Did you guys listen to the commentary by any chance?
Haven't had a chance yet.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure that
I only have the DVD, not the Blu-ray, so it's not on there.
It's a great commentary that I highly recommend you guys check out. But at the end, he's like, I'm kind of bummed this movie ends in Chinatown. And Robert Town's like, why? He's like, because Chinatown's a state of mind, man. It's not a real place. And I was just like, I think that's so true. And yet I also understand why it has to end in Chinatown.
The thing too about Gittes that I really love, talking about him having this big heart, we're going to talk about Out of the Past later this season, right? And Out of the Past does the work to make you actually believe like Robert Mitchum is the guy he is both before and after. Like he's got that heart. Too many noirs, I think, and neo-noirs especially, are so focused on their main character always being cool and detached so that when it's time to have a romantic beat, it means nothing, right? Like, I look at what, like, the mistake that, and I'm not going to drag too much, but, you know, what Refn loves to do to Ryan Gosling, right? Where he's just like, what if you had no feelings at all? What if you were just Ryan O'Neal in The Driver? Except also, I want people to believe that you have feelings while you do that. Like, it doesn't totally square. You know, you can do Ryan O'Neal in The Driver, but then he has to just not exist as a person. And for something like Chinatown to work, for that to have a romantic component to it, you need to actually believe it. And I do kind of think about, you know, to put it in today's parlance, like, part of the reason that people still love showing up to movies where, like, the real life couple is in it together, whether it's, you know, Tom Holland and a Zendaya or whatever, or even not real life couple, but, like, you know, people showed up to do, like, young people showed up to Dune hoping to see a little, you know, flirtation between Zendaya and Timothée Chalamet, which, you know, didn't quite happen. Maybe in Dune Part 2, I don't know. But the point is, like, they want to see that because you want to actually buy that romance, right? You want to actually see, like, two beautiful people, and you want to believe that they have a full, you know, that they can sell at heart. Nicholson and Faye Dunaway sell that so well in this movie, and you couldn't do that if Nicholson was playing only a cool guy. If Nicholson was in the mode that he is in The Two Jakes, this doesn't work.
Well, I think the smartest thing the movie does in regards to making Jake a human being, other than, like, you know, the great writing and Nicholson's performance imbuing him with the humanity, is cutting his nose. Having him walk around the majority of the movie with this fucking bandage on his face.
Yes.
You don't even need the other scenes of, like, him at the Orange Grove getting his ass kicked by some rednecks. You don't need to see him getting, like, having to, like, get one up on a guy and basically cheat in a fight at the old person's home. He's never tough or cool, but you don't even need any of those other scenes, because just watching a guy, like, walk around with a giant bloody bandage on his face is just immediately like, okay, he's not invincible.
He's fallible. Yeah, no, exactly. I
And I mean, again, the symbolic stuff of he can't, you know, see what's right in front of his face and blah blah blah, you know. But it's just, I mean, and that's probably, like, the most iconic Nicholson imagery in his entire career, of him with that bandage on his face. It's just, I don't know what it's just really cool. And then again, to the stuff like what Mike says with the romance, just her helping tend to his nose, like, towards the end of the movie, just adds, and it's an intimate act that goes beyond sex. Like, they have sex after that, but it's beyond, like, there's something intimate letting a woman or anybody like clean this horrible fucking injury that you've sustained. So it's just, you know, like Mike says, a lot of movies don't do that work. Let a guy be a kind of a doofus, to be honest. Giddies is not a tough guy. He's I mean, he's a tough guy. He will get into scrapes, but he's not an effective tough guy for the most part.
You know what Giddies is? He's actually the guy that does this. You know, like, there's so many mistakes when it comes to movies, and we talk about movies, like, you know, an example I bring up a lot is In the Cut, a movie I don't necessarily love, but, like, you know, people talk about Mark Ruffalo in The Cut, and I love the casting of Mark Ruffalo in The Cut because he's not at all the guy you would cast if you were casting a movie to play that sleazy cop guy, but he is 100% who that guy is in real life. When they do the news story about that kind of cop, it's Mark Ruffalo. And I think that when I complain about, you know, I often lament, like, you know, tough guy movies where it's just like, it feels so fraudulent to me anytime it's like, well, I'm a tough guy and it's tough being a tough guy and this, that. Like, those aren't those guys. Jake Giddies is that kind of guy. Like, the kind of guy you see in that work, the kind of guy who does it, is the guy who fully, sincerely says to a woman, like, look, you want my advice, go home, forget you ever thought your husband had an affair. Like, you don't want to see this. Like, he'll do it if you want to, you know, you want to pay me the money, I'll do it. But you don't want to, like, that. Those little moments make him feel like a real person that does this.
100%. I think that the first scene of this film is immediately kind of deconstructing the notion of these types of movies, right? Like, so many film noirs open with a person in a detective in a PI's office, and seeing photos of somebody's, they love cheating on them, whatever the case might be. And Burt Young, who's so great in that scene, and just those the kind of whimpers and the frustrations and the what have you, and then him attacking the Venetian blinds. And literally Nicholson's like, all right, enough's enough. Like, you're not eating my fucking blinds. I put them in yesterday or whatever. There's something very sort of dismissive of all the kind of stuff that you think you know about film noir. And I mean, that's the whole neo-noir component of it, but still, like, so few, if any, movies can actually stick this and can actually tonally do what this movie does.
And another thing that I love, and Phil, you alluded in a different context, but you alluded to Pulp Fiction before, right?
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things people talked about with Pulp Fiction, I remember when, I was a kid, my parents were telling me about Pulp Fiction. Sorry to make myself sound like a child, but, when they would tell me about it, they were like, part of the reason it was so significant is these characters, these, criminals, were talking like regular people. And that was so endearing. And that, people chalk that up to Diner. Chinatown does, to a degree, have that, because one of the best moments, we talked about the barbershop scene, right? In a lot of these neo-noirs and these hard-boiled films, you just have the character and he's only ever talking about the case. What I love about the barbershop scene and the transition afterward is he's so riled up. He's so riled up in the barbershop scene, and a lesser neo-noir would make that like his modus operandi for the rest of like the act. And instead, the barber starts telling him a joke. And we cut to Nicholson bursting through the door of his office going, hang on, come here, Phil, you got to hear this joke. Okay, so this guy is asking about how, no, hang on. And they stretch it out. Of course, the joke-telling scene is so, I love it because it's so like, yes, an actual private detective is not 24/7 sitting, no matter who it is, right? It doesn't matter what you do for a living. You have other interests. You have other things that you do. The brilliance of having Jake just be so caught up in wanting to tell this joke. And
but
even though they try and stop him, it's brilliant.
The joke isn't very funny, but Nicholson laughing at the end of the joke and it just busting him up is what makes the scene funny, in my opinion.
And I think it's also, one of the things that I love about that joke, because this script is so airtight and it's so good and everything pays off. People don't talk enough about in this film. It's called Chinatown, right? And his joke that he tells is a racist joke against Chinese people, but also in that weird way of kind of the weird Orientalism that was going on in LA at the time, where it was like simultaneously, I mean, hell, up until the 70s, those laundry ads that used to do the ancient Chinese secret line and things like that, like that it's something treated as both mystic and also degrading. It's also, and that is an undercurrent throughout this movie, with the treatment of the house workers, and then the payoff of that Nicholson is so zoned out when the guy is saying, he's saying to the water bad for salt water bad for grass.
For the grass.
He makes Nicholson does the racist comment where he goes, too bad for glass. And then what is it? The glasses are in the he missed it because he was too busy. Yeah. It's like that is an undercurrent of this that I didn't pick up on the first. I mean, I think the first time I watched it, this movie I was probably like 12. So I think I just picked up on it's a detective story, and I'm working my way through the AFI list, and I'm 12 at Hollywood Video. And then you come around, you start to appreciate some of the craft. But like even this viewing, there were still moments where I was just like, fuck, yeah, that pays off too. That pays off.
Everything pays off about this script.
Even Burt Young pays off.
Yes.
Burt Young. And listen, it's going to sound fucked up to say, but it's a hilarious punchline that when Jake shows up at his house at the end, his wife has a black eye. Like, it's like, listen, domestic violence, not funny. Like, it's not great, but it's also like, I mean, come on, that's a good visual joke, and
sure.
And listen, you know what? It's not the most fucked up thing that happened in that section of the movie. We just found out that it's her daughter, her sister, her daughter, her sister.
Yeah.
I mean, I do think that everything about this script works. There's a reason why this is a script that is, studied and broken apart, and it's a seamless script. It's a great script. this is one of those examples, as you said earlier, Mike, of everything is firing on all cylinders, right? And on the commentary, Fincher asked early on, Robert Town was like, I saw this movie at a screening. I saw, for the first time, whatever it was, 6 months before the movie came out or whatever. And he's like, I, like everybody else, was convinced that this movie was going to be bad, that it was going to be a disaster. So when I saw it and it turned out to be great, it was a surprise to me. And I do think that there's a bunch of things that are all kind of working out in a way that you could never have predicted. You couldn't have predicted that the original composer was going to get fired off of this movie and Jerry Goldsmith was going to do it in 9 days and make one of, the greatest scores that's ever been. You didn't know that all of these bit players were all going to work so seamlessly when edited together. I also didn't know that was Crispin Glover's father in this, which is just amazing. Like, there's just so much richness in the planets aligning for this movie.
Well, you didn't know that Roman Polanski was going to direct it. Like, when this project started out, it was Evans, and Evans went to Nicholson, and Nicholson wanted to get Polanski involved, and Polanski was reticent to do it for the totally ridiculous reason of he didn't want to go back to California because that's where his wife had recently been murdered. Absurd, right?
Not a ridiculous reason.
I'm joking. I'm being facetious, but I'm saying, absurd, said Robert Evans. Like, that's the insanity of it. Is that any other human being on this fucking planet would hear Roman Polanski go, I can't go back to where my wife was killed, and go, I understand. But Robert Evans
on this day.
But Robert Evans is like, nah, you doing it. Like,
I do want to say though, and not to spend too much time down the Polanski road again, but it is worth saying that as a filmmaker, the compositions in this movie, the choices in terms of where he finds suspense and how he builds suspense out of things that you wouldn't have thought would be suspenseful at the time. Fincher on the commentary talks, I'm going to talk a lot about this commentary because it's great commentary, but Fincher talks a lot about just sort of, there's a scene where you'll have Faye Dunaway at the far extreme of one shot, and then you'll have Jack Nicholson in the reverse at the farther end. So it's as though the distance between them speaks to their communication. There's just all sorts of things and choices in the way that this movie is made is also antithetical to the way noirs were made, right? So you have this foreign filmmaker, for lack of a better way of putting it, being put inside a decidedly American genre, and it's creating something entirely new.
It's a decidedly American genre, but one that is so heavily influenced by German
expressionism,
film, German expressionism film. So, and a lot of the noirs were made by European guys that came over and were just doing work. So there is something almost absurdly fitting for Polanski to come and do it. And it's funny that things like, it's like a complete 180 from how those guys got to make their movies. They had to work quick and dirty. Like, what? Fuck. Totally. Casablanca is not a noir, but like that movie was made like dirt ass cheap. Yeah. They didn't have like enough like sets, so they just like didn't shoot in a certain direction. So it's just like, all right, well, so it's fitting that he got to all this money, all this time, really think everything out. And I sent this to Mike after I rewatched Chinatown. I forgot that I said this in my letterboxd when I watched Chinatown 3 years ago. I can't possibly understand why Polanski would want to make a movie about how LA is fueled by tainted water thanks to the actions of a perverted madman that ends up killing an angelic blonde woman. I can't understand this choice at all.
Yeah, why? Why would he want to do that?
Why would he crank out his masterpiece with a movie with that kind of backstory? Who could see? Who could say? I'm not a therapist. I just have a podcast.
Phil, I think you making the point about him being a foreign individual is great because like the Robert Towne script had a voiceover that Polanski immediately gets rid of. Polanski changes the ending, which was supposed to be a happier ending. But I think that it's one of these things too, when you look at like, let's take Unforgiven for an example, right? Unforgiven, the Oscar-winning Western. That's not just a tradition of the American Western. That's the fact that Americans made Westerns. Then Kurosawa starts making samurai films based on the Westerns. Then America starts making Westerns more akin to those samurai films. Then the Italians start making Westerns that are their variation on that. And then it all comes back to America going, oh, I guess we have to make our Westerns more like the Italians' version of the American version of the Japanese version of the American version. Noir as well, when you look at Chinatown, it doesn't get remarked upon enough, I don't think, that, like, yes, it owes a huge debt to American noir films. It also owes a debt to the French New Wave. Those French New Wave guys are taking those noir films and finding something in them. And I could not help but be struck by the fact that so much of this movie is shot on a tripod, gorgeous shot composition and everything. That final sequence, let's jump around too much, but the final sequence when Faye Dunaway is dead in the car and John Huston comes over and he's doing the, oh Lord, the camera is handheld, which is not something we've been doing up until this point. The camera's handheld and bounces around to Jake and the cop and them going back and forth, and Jake makes the comment, I forget exactly what his line is now. I think I jotted it down. I didn't, but Jake says that line and the cop responds, and it feels like the ending of Breathless.
Well, it's interesting you bring that up because if I'm not mistaken, it's a oneer as well. So it's all kind of this chaotic, handheld, one take thing. It's very messy. It almost makes it more unsettling, right?
Yeah.
Because you don't have that locked down feeling.
Well, the facade's over. You know, the whole facade of, oh, this is like the 1930s noirs we all grew up with. Except this time, the bad guy is an incestual asshole who really just wants more money because, well, that's just what I do. And he gets away with it. And his daughter, who he raped the baby into, and who he's probably going to rape the baby, the grown-up incest daughter now. And it's all just like, oh yeah, this is all this nostalgia for the 30s noir movies. It's all bullshit. The bad guys win. LA is built on a bed of dead bodies.
Yep. A husk that's been
It's a cursed town. The land is cursed. Zelda Rubinstein cannot clean this house. I mean, it is like, you know, when you allow a filmmaker to think these things through, it's like, okay, how do we subtly tell people what you've all been watching or all the stuff you grew up watching was bullshit?
Very quickly.
Yes.
There are 3 things that Fincher says about the end of this movie that I think are worth just saying.
Mm-hmm.
The first is, he says, there's no way that shot hits her in the eye at that distance with the gun, by the way. Not a chance.
It doesn't.
38 snub nose.
No,
I don't
it
think
doesn't.
it can hit the building, let alone hit her. So there's that, which I love. He also says, this is movie violence as good as it gets because it literally is changing her performance. Like it's changing everyone's performance. You are feeling the horror of what has just transpired. And then I love, this is maybe the most Fincher thing he could possibly say. I'd have redone this last shot because I think people look a little too much like extras. I'd have done 35 takes or so they looked pretty bored of what was going on. But
Dave.
I mean, whatever. I do think that the end of this movie and just sort of the final, because I'm trying to remember. Obviously, I just watched it, but I don't know when it cuts into the handheld. I think you have that long wide shot of the car driving away, right? And then you hear the horn, and then there's like a good 10 seconds before she starts screaming.
I think it's after she shoots John Huston.
Yeah, because like we have that long shot where the car drives away. Then you hear her scream. Then the camera stays where we are as everyone runs towards the car. And then it cuts into us next to the car. And at that point, it's all handheld, if I'm not mistaken.
I think you're right.
I say all of this just because I do think that the staging of everything from the moment when we get that amazing montage of Chinatown, where you see all the Chinese neon signs of all the restaurants, and you have kind of that moment. The music is doing something really interesting, which it's almost joyful at the fact that, like, yeah, we're in Chinatown now, but also foreboding. Do you know what I'm saying?
It's like, hey, we told you we were gonna get here, and we kept our promise, but oh, you're not gonna like that we kept our promise.
Which is amazing.
Do you think John Huston, Noah Cross, was genuinely upset at seeing his daughter dead, or was he putting on an act?
I think he was genuine. I know
So do
that
I. And I think that makes it more upsetting.
I agree.
100%, because he has that line that he says, a man never knows what he's capable of, or something along those lines. I think that we don't. I think, and not to get too broad on this, but I think that one thing that we make a mistake when we talk about good people or bad people, right? And we create this binary, is that we forget that there's a big difference between somebody who did something bad or did a terrible thing and is able to recognize and is I don't want to say apologetic, but feels guilt about what they did, versus the much more evil and dangerous person who sees nothing wrong with their behavior, right? And sees nothing wrong with what they did.
Well, because I think the latter shows complete lack of humanity, right? A complete lack of. So it is ultimately worse for him to be able to recognize something terrible and still have done it.
Well, that's the thing. I think that in the case of his character, and I think it's kind of it's a thing that pops up in a lot of Polanski's films. I mean, Polanski's worldview, I think, is largely nihilistic, and I think is nihilistic, which makes sense given his life and given his background and all of that. Because at the end of the day, I mean, when you look at, we were just talking about the Europeans who make these films, right? When you look at like what the French filmmakers, for the most part, do with American films and their adaptations of them and their warping of them, it's making it into a more abstract art. When you look at what the Italians do when they make their spaghetti westerns or their noirs, or you look at, again, talking about Poland here or anything like that, any country that was under fascism, their examinations of America tend to be going, you think these institutions are going to protect you. You have no idea how dangerously close you are to what we went through.
Right.
And I think that Chinatown, despite being Robert Towne's script and being a noir, right? Being a noir that's basically, a cynical detective story, what Polanski brings to it is this feeling, and that's why he changes the ending and says, no, she has to die, is this feeling of, no, you guys don't understand. For you, the history of California as a corrupt and lawless town is kitschy and kind of like, oh man, that was zany. But it's like, you guys do not understand how very, very close your country is to fascism. You do not understand how much the institutions that you have faith in are so very close to serving the worst kinds of people. And I think that what makes Huston's character so interesting in this movie is the fact that he doesn't think that he's a bad guy. He is remorseless. He's doing what he's got to do. He doesn't see any problem with it. Nobody involved in this California land scheme feels in any way bothered by it. And I do think that there's a little bit of, and not to take it too up, but I was reading up on I was reading somebody writing about Russian history recently and talking about the country's sort of predilection to despotism, right? And the idea that in Russia, the average person, if you go to them and go, well, I can't believe this, the cops are all corrupt. They go, yeah, that's how that works. You pay the cops to leave you alone. The rich get richer and the rest of us suffer. That's how this always goes. A fascinating thing about California, in a way, and I'm not speaking to California now, but, the transition from the Wild West to the LA Confidential era is it does feel like there is this sense of like, amongst people like, yeah, of course, there's going to be, yeah, the system doesn't exist to protect us. Of course not. There's this generally agreed upon idea of like, yeah, no, there's a lot of terrible people and they're just going to keep exploiting us. That's how this works.
I do feel like on the Noah Cross of it all, I mean, can we all agree that it's pretty obvious that Daniel Plainview is based on Noah Cross?
Oh yeah.
I mean,
he's just doing a John Huston impression. It's not even
crazy how much he sounds like Daniel Plain. And also, also just in terms of the character in himself. I mean, yes, it's water instead of oil, but like they are decidedly similar characters. That's not to take anything away from There Will Be Blood, which I obviously think is a masterpiece, a wonderful movie. But it was crazy when I watched this during the pandemic for my AFI club with friends, and I hear John Huston's voice because I hadn't seen Chinatown in quite some time. I was like, wait a fucking second. Like it's pretty insane.
Well, you know what? It hit me this time, and thinking about its place in history and everything, that they couldn't have even possibly thought this through. He's got like it's not exact one to one, but he's got a kind of cadence voice thing going on that's similar to Nixon.
Yeah.
And Nixon had just got thrown out of the White House not too long before this movie came out, which definitely gives it another bit of that everything's working on a cosmic level for this movie to really land the way it does. For a movie that's so distrustful and cynical of our institutions, to have your villain be a guy who's very Nixonian, to come out a year or so after he gets thrown out of the White House is pretty goddamn perfect, if you ask me. It's also pretty crazy that Noah Cross makes such an impression because Huston is such a character. He's got 2 scenes in the movie.
Yeah. Well,
and he it's 3, but it's like 2 where the second one basically extends into the next scene, basically.
Yeah.
Maybe the only flaw of the script, and it's not even a flaw, it's that this character needed to be played by someone who could give him the inhumanity necessary, because they don't really do anything other than Faye Dunaway saying, "Oh, well, he's a bad guy." We don't see him do anything. But when she says that he raped her and made an incest baby with her, you just look, you're like, yeah, he's putting something into this performance. I buy that shit. Like,
I also just, it's funny you should say that, because so on our 92 podcast, we just recently did A Few Good Men.
Yeah.
And Nicholson, famously has 3 scenes in that movie, was paid like $10 million for 3 scenes.
Hell yeah, Jack.
And that is also similarly to this role, to Noah Cross. You need a fucking 500-pound gorilla that can come in and imbue, not to say anything bad about the Chinatown script, or if you're going to for that matter, but like, you need a titan that's going to come in and bring something. So those 3 scenes are going to feel earth-shattering, right? They're gonna just really just throw the entire dynamics of the film into question.
Well, it's because you could see in the script, like, you could just, like, based on the script that Noah Cross is the quote-unquote villain, but at the end of the day, like Polanski saw, that the actual villain of the movie is the system that allows a guy like this to succeed. So you don't need all these scenes of him being villainous and, twiddling his fingers going, yes, we have to get my granddaughter so I can incest her.
I mean, to the point about the script and what it needs, the beautiful thing about this and how this film comes together, and why I love talking about film as a thing where, it is so collaborative, the script does not actually, for argument's sake, need a John Huston. And by that I mean, when you look at that character on paper, you know what he's thinking, what Town is thinking, which is, well, this is a Sidney Greenstreet, right? This is Sidney Greenstreet and Maltese Falcon. Like, this is the kind of role that a Sidney Greenstreet would play. And if you had a Sidney Greenstreet in that role, a Sidney Greenstreet type, it would work. It would be fine. It would get the job done, right? The beauty of Chinatown in a lot of ways is that it could have gotten by on just the script. It's such a good script. You put that in anybody's hands, right? And it would have been fine. But what I think people who don't obsess over movies don't think about sometimes,
normal people
is like, they don't understand that the perfect script, an airtight script, is only going to make you a decent movie on its own. Because how many scripts that are on the blacklist every year that everybody's like, man, if you just get like this thing, it's a hit all on its own, and then it actually gets made, and we go, it was fine. I want to say that to say, like, the movie doesn't fail if you don't have John Huston in that role.
No.
I just want to emphasize, like, it doesn't fail if you don't have John Huston in the role. But the fact that you were able to get somebody with that amount of presence, and also, like Tom notes, has that Nixon vibe, especially because Nixon was a Californian, and also is essentially the father of the noir genre.
Yeah,
what he did on Walter Falcon. Like, it's got so many layers.
It's that's basically what I'm saying, is that the script functions so perfectly on its, like, you can see that in writing it, he's thinking this guy doesn't need to be this quote unquote well-rounded character with scenes explaining it. He's a functionary because he's not actually the villain. It's the system. So Polanski realizing, well, we can get more out of this without even changing it, just getting the right guy, and a guy who hits like 4 or 5 different levels of why he's perfect for the role. And also just like a little thing, not even in the script, it's something that Huston did, calling him Gitz. He's not calling him by the right name. Nicholson, Giddy's even corrects him, and he still keeps calling, and he keeps calling him Gitz. That's a thing they did, that he did when they had like their first production meeting or whatever. Another great story about their first production meeting is that at the time Jack was in a relationship with Angelica Huston, and they weren't sure if John knew or if he was okay with it. And Huston goes up to Jack Nicholson in the production meeting in front of everyone and goes, "So, I hear you're having physical relations with my daughter, Mr. Gitz."
Oh my god!
And everyone was like, Jack. It was just like, oh fuck. but from that little bit of publicly castrating Nicholson, he also came up with a character beat. I'm going to mispronounce this fucking guy's name because I really don't actually give a shit about this guy. He's nothing to me.
Truly the introduction of Noah Cross, I would say the most foreboding music cue in this movie is the drive up to, like, getting off the boat at Catalina, the drive in the Woody up to Noah's house. That is when the movie is at its most sort of, oh fuck, something bad is about to happen. And it's amazing, but there's also just the some of the choices of the shots in that conversation are phenomenal as well. There's an interesting thing about how the entire movie is from Jake's perspective, except from one moment and one shot, which is a reverse when Noah gets up from the table and Jake is still sitting there, and Jake asks him, "Do you know Hollis?" And we see for a brief moment what that registers on Noah's face. And
I saw you at the pig, and
we
got, you had an argument with him at this restaurant, and the only time, like you're saying, where you see the mask drop and you're seeing him think, all right, how do I turn this around?
But it's the only time that the audience is let in on the fact that this is the bad guy, right? Like, this is the guy you should be fucking paying attention to. But again, it's just like all the John Huston stuff is amazing. There's also something about the fact that we don't meet him until like an hour into the movie, something along those lines.
It's a good bit into the movie, because it's it takes a while for Hollis to die.
Maybe it's 45 minutes because I know that we'd see the photos of him in the office, so he's really spoken about in kind of hushed tones. He's all kind of there but not. And then you have the scene after when he's talking to Evelyn and drops the bomb that he's met her dad. Yeah. And her entire fucking body changes.
She's literally having a goddamn meltdown.
She lights a second cigarette, even though he's like, you already have one going.
Yeah.
And then we don't even see her face. We cut to the ashtray, and we hear in off screen Nicholson say, "Does me talking about your father upset you?" Like, these are all choices that would never be allowed today, right? Like, the idea, you'd have to see the actor's face, you'd have to see it all registering.
Well, it's all that stuff of like we don't meet him for like 45 minutes into the movie. You know, Hollis doesn't die like for like a good chunk into the movie. Like the plot doesn't even really kick into the movie, because it almost sounds like a cliche to say, like, when you're talking about a good movie, is that the plot's not important. It's about the characters, because it ends with Evelyn. Like, they figure out what happened, and they're just like 30 more minutes of like just trying to like get Evelyn to safety and make sure Jake doesn't get arrested and everything. And it ends on her death. Once she dies, the plot doesn't matter anymore.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. I mean, but what's also interesting to your point is the first 20 minutes or so of the movie are Jake Gittes watching Hollis try to figure out what the fuck is going on. Like, Hollis is also on a mystery of his own.
Yeah, and it's funny. It's not it's not an exact 1-to-1, but with the Huston connection, it's very similar to the Maltese Falcon, in that Sam has his partner following this person, and then the partner gets killed. And if he just knew who killed the partner, the whole plot would basically be wrapped up immediately, but he has to go through this whole rigmarole. So it's really just like...
Totally.
And so after that, he's trying for like, before Hollis is killed, he's like, I want to talk to this guy and figure out what the fuck is going on, why I got used. And then he dies, and it becomes a much bigger problem for everybody. So it's, again, one of those things of like, what did the noirs in the past do? Let's like do that. We'll put a different, darker spin on it. And I mean, yeah, it's really just a brilliant construction.
No, 100%. And I do think too that, like, you know, the whole fake Evelyn thing of Diane Ladd showing up as Evelyn, and then us realizing that she's an actor that's been put up to this. When Faye Dunaway shows up, I mean, Faye Dunaway's incredible. You know, she's doing just masterful work at this point in her career. But this is going to sound like an oxymoron, but there's this inordinate amount of strength and fragility that she is giving off. Her presence feels like performative, and then when you see her, like the moment that stays with me in this movie that is after she has sex with Gittes, and he brings up her dad, and she like covers herself, like her she literally like covers her naked body. It's like her immediate reaction. She is such a just tragic and doomed character. There's just she really is just so haunted in this movie.
It's again just with that perfect script, man. It's that, you know, they are two sides of the same coin. That Evelyn and Jake are both putting up shields for themselves. You know, he's a bleeding heart optimist who has to put up a shield because he knows the world sucks, but he doesn't want to believe that. And she's putting on this tough, strong exterior because she is not in any kind of position of power, and she has to pretend she is, otherwise she's going to get eaten up. And even still, like, once she starts letting the real Evelyn out, she opens herself up to this, you know, if she just kept her shield up a little longer, maybe she wouldn't have shot her father. Maybe she wouldn't have got shot by the perfectly placed 38 snub-nosed bullet from 50 yards away.
Well, there's I mean, listen, it's a towering performance by Faye Dunaway in this film, and obviously it all kind of builds towards this amazing scene at the end where she confesses what transpired between her and her father, and the rape, and the child that came out of that rape, and it clearly rattles Jake. Like, it breaks him in a way that we don't see, and it is all kind of there. We're seeing the breadcrumbs of a guy who could be broken by this information. This all goes to say that, like, if you take those old fucking hard-boiled characters from those old film noirs and you put them in this scene where Evelyn confesses this, I don't think it would matter to them. Like, I don't ultimately think it would have the same resonance. I think they're too, I don't want to say two-dimensional, but they're built in this alpha male way that wouldn't allow themselves to actually ingest that information.
Well, it's because the world they inhabit, and this is the problem with so many of these neo-noirs, these, like I said, these tough guy movies, is that they just view it as, like, why would a dame do this thing? Either for love or for money. Like, that's it. And the beauty of what this film does in a lot of ways is it kind of sits down and goes, okay, well, let's kind of break this down. Why would somebody actually do this? Why would these people actually be these people? Let's take out love and money. Let's take out any of that. Why would they actually do these things? Dunaway in this film is kind of, I mean, look, she's on an incredible run, as you acknowledged, Phil. But what she does in this movie is she just kind of brings, she's the first person, Huston's the second, where for the first chunk of this movie, it's just a Nicholson showcase. He is the coolest guy in the room. He's not cool, but he's the only one.
Yeah.
When she shows up, suddenly this is like a new hurdle for him, a new opposition. And suddenly he is no longer in control of this movie.
I completely agree.
And then you have, by the third hit where you have Huston show up, it's like, well, now it's anyone's film. Like, now everyone's battling for control of this.
I agree, and I also just want to say that when she shows up in the film is right as he's telling that joke.
Yes.
Yeah.
So he's immediately discombobulated no matter what, right? It doesn't even matter. He doesn't know who she is at this point, right? He just knows that he's made an ass of himself in front of a potential client. So he's immediately thrown off of his game, and he's already on sort of shaky ground. So it's the perfect moment for her character to come in and essentially destroy his world.
To jump on what Phil was saying about how, the older noir guys would not have reacted the way Jake does in this, the third act, or just the whole movie in general, is that, the main characters, the detectives in all those old movies, they weren't characters. They were battering rams that were just, they were interesting and charismatic and everything. Bogart, and Mitchum, those guys would do a lot of interesting work in those movies, but they were guys who just were we are who we are. We are going to figure out this case because that's just what we do, and that's it. So by what Town and then Polanski, his changes was like, we're going to make it where Evelyn's probably the most interesting character in the movie because of how tragic everything in her life is and her ending, but like, we're going to make our detective an interesting character. He is a guy who does actually go through a journey, who has a backstory that leads him to where he is in the beginning, and which then ultimately affects him even harder in the end. So it is that thing like we were talking about before, looking at what they did then, but now we have all this stuff now, and we have the hindsight of what those movies did. If we just repeated, kind of like what Mike says the ones that get it wrong do, was just tough guy being tough guys and there's nothing to it. This one knows you can't just do that. You need a main detective who is going to lead you through this labyrinth and almost like an audience surrogate, be the guy who is, you want to do something about this, but fuck, we can't.
I agree, but I fully agree, and I also think it's worth saying too that Evelyn is not a femme fatale.
She's not. No.
Like you are led to believe by her entrance, by her, one of her great lines of, "I don't have to." What is it? Something like, "I don't have to be tough. My lawyer does that," or something along those lines.
Yeah.
Like she is incredible from the jump, and you're like, oh well, okay, yeah, she looks like a femme fatale. She smokes cigarettes. She's talking, smack. But quickly you realize that it's all a facade, and then underneath is actually this really broken, haunted person that's had this horrible thing happen to them. So again, this comes back to sort of what we've been saying through most of this episode, but these two characters that are playing inside the sandbox of an archetype, or you know what I mean, of what in this genre they usually speak to, and yet they're completely different than any of our preconceived notions of it.
They do it with Huston too. I mean, with Huston, you would have expected, okay, this is the rich guy who's behind it all, and he even has his, quote unquote bumbling henchman, Polanski being like the kind of Peter Lorre-esque creep who cuts Nicholson's nose. It's like, okay, he's the rich guy, but his bumbling idiot, the private eyes are going to fuck things up, and the case is going to be resolved because he has guys that he shouldn't be trusting. But in this case, that doesn't happen. Everyone in Noah Cross's circle is competent.
No, 100%.
Even the one private eye even the one private eye who Nicholson makes fun of for being a dirty, smelly asshole, who he beats up at the old person's home. He has to cheat to beat that guy up, and then at the end, he has the gun on him, and it's like, all right, well, we're going to get my daughter now, so like, you're not getting out of this.
I'd be remiss if I didn't. We just for a quick second. There's a couple quick things I want to mention. The first is Polanski's cameo is amazing. Obviously, he's the guy who cuts open Nicholson's nose. They did not know that Polanski was going to ask for this cameo. And in fact, when he said he was going to do it, that was when Robert Towne wrote the line, "Who brought the midget?" Which I think is fucking amazing. Even though we don't use that term anymore, I'll just say that, like, it's just great that Robert Towne was like, yeah, you can have this cameo, but I'm not going to let you have it without me kicking you in the nuts.
I'm going to roast the hell out of you, bro.
The other thing I wanted to mention really quickly is the stopwatches. I fucking love
Brilliant.
the little watches under the tire.
Brilliant, yeah.
He's got an entire glove box filled with them. Is fucking amazing. It's so old school.
That feels like something they must have like read from like a real PI or something of the time, because that's such a perfect little thing. Best. One final thing I want to mention, and I know Phil's got some, but I need to get this. I want to say it is that when Jake confronts Noah and he's like, I know everything, I know what's going on, he says a line that I say all the time that has stuck with me to my core since I rewatched it a few years ago. Why are you doing it? How much better can you eat? What could you buy that you can't already afford? And it really does get to the heart of the entire movie. It gets to the entire fucking state of the world we're in, where we look at every rich asshole who buys Twitter and be like, what more do you need? You can live my life 10,000 times and still have enough money to buy a country. Why are you still doing this? And it really just is because I can.
It's power. I'll say this too, though, because you brought up that Noah Cross has so many great lines. There's a moment in this movie that I think also really encapsulates the movie, which is Noah Cross says to Jake, "You have no idea what you're dealing with here. You have no idea what this is about." Something to that effect. And Jake kind of smiles and he's like, "What's funny is like my old captain said that about." My old captain in Chinatown used to say that, or something along those lines. And then Noah says, "And how did that go?" And it's just silence. Like the idea that like something fucking bad happened and that Chinatown is a metaphor for everything bad for Jake. And it's only going to be encapsulated even more by what's about to transpire. The last thing that I wanted to say very quickly, and it was just something that really kind of spoke to me this time around, because I just wrote a pilot about a coroner. And the fucking morgue set in this is amazing. It has so much character. I love the way it looks. I love that it's not these now everything is metal, obviously. It's the metal drawers, but these are like weirdly porcelain or something. There's something very sort of like old and creepy about it. And then there's that amazing line when Jake says to the coroner, "How did this guy drown in an inch of water?" He's like, "We got water out of him. He drowned." That's like, as far as the coroner's concerned, it's an open and shut case, which I just think is fucking incredible.
It's funny you bring that up, Phil, because the one last thing I want to bring up before we wind down is also about a set. My favorite scene in Chinatown, the one I think about all the time, has nothing to do with any characters. It is a scene that I often think is the opening of the movie, and it's not, because there's the Burt Young scene. And it is the perfect example of, you know, in film school, they always tell you show, don't tell, right? We're in that town hall meeting. Thus far, we have not been told where we are, and we have not been told when we are. And anybody else would do a chyron. Anybody else would do a chyron. And instead, we get FDR framed on the wall. We see a newspaper with the Our Street comic strip over a guy's shoulder, a map of the Alto Valero Dam, a California flag. Then we cut to Jake reading a newspaper about Seabiscuit. You have given us the when and the where without any dialogue, without any chyrons. You have just perfectly set the scene. And so many people who want to over-explain it, it is done with such subtlety. It's not like it decides to, you know, play Creedence Clearwater Revival to tell us we're in Vietnam. It doesn't. It just is like, listen, you get it. Now,
I just wait. Because I texted this to Mike. That scene has maybe my favorite Jack moment in the whole movie. Not the best acting moment, but the best Jack moment. When Ron Howard's dad lets the sheep through and Jack sees it and he just starts laughing like a little asshole because he's just like, oh, I'm a messy bitch and I love the mess. It's just like, it's so goddamn funny.
Perfect.
It's so goddamn funny.
So, Tom, you mentioned the best Jack Nicholson moment. As we always wind this down, let's talk about the many bests this could have won. Tom, how do you think Chinatown did at the Academy Awards that year? And I'll give you this caveat. We have talked about this exact same Academy Awards ceremony last season.
You truly forget that I don't know anything that happens on this show.
Yeah, okay.
The second we're done recording, this is going to be mind wiped out of me as I watch Big Mouth.
This was a hard year, though. This was a tough year.
So how do you think...
nominated for picture, nominated for director, nominated for actor. I guess I would say actress. I don't know if they did any like category fraud or whatever, but actress, screenplay, cinematography, score. I'm gonna say it won for Jack. It won for screenplay, and it won for cinematography. I don't know.
Okay, so I will tell you right now, you're close. It was nominated for Best Picture alongside The Conversation, Lenny, The Tower... I'm sorry, Tom, did you want to take that beat on this one? You've done it 3 times on the show.
Fucking Lenny.
There we go. 3 times on this show, Tom's exact verbiage was, Lenny, that movie fucking sucks. Anyway.
It does.
It does. So, The Conversation, Lenny, The Towering Inferno, and the winner, The Godfather Part 2. Just worth pointing out, The Conversation and Godfather Part 2 are both in the registry. You are correct. It was also nominated for Best Director.
I need to jump in very quickly. The Towering Inferno nominated for Best Picture. Just take a second.
I want to be clear. Not only, if folks go back, we discussed this with Kenny on our Top Hat episode in Absurdity, but it's going to get worse, Phil. It's going to get worse. Stick with me. It was nominated for Best Director, loses to The Godfather Part 2. Jack Nicholson was nominated for Best Actor, however, loses to Art Carney in Harry and Tonto.
Oh, of course.
Honestly, I've watched Harry and Tonto. It's a good movie. I like that performance, but you know.
Yeah, but I mean, listen, it's a fair win. Everyone's still talking about it. You go down to your local watering hole, and everyone is just saying, "Hey guys, remember Art Carney and Harry and Tonto?" Right before they go out back and bird dog each other.
Nicholson at this point only has 1 Oscar, right? For
for Cuckoo's Nest, right? Yes.
But then he gets
win
it again
for
supporting for
Terms of Endearment, and then gets lead again for As Good as It Gets.
For As Good as It Gets.
So, it was nominated for Best Actress for Faye Dunaway, loses to Ellen Burstyn for Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore.
Okay.
Which is also the year of Gina Rollins for A Woman Under the Influence, which is why we talked about it before.
That's fair loss.
It wins Best Original Screenplay. It was nominated for Best Original Dramatic Score, but loses to The Godfather Part 2.
Okay. I mean...
It was nominated for Best Sound, but loses to The Great Gatsby.
Sure.
Nominated for Best Costume Design, which it loses to Earthquake.
Wait, can I just say it's absolutely bizarre that it loses it loses sound to The Great Gatsby and not The Towering Inferno.
Wait, we're getting there.
Earthquake.
Everybody, we're getting there. Wait for it. Wait for it. It was nominated for Best Art Direction, which it loses to The Godfather Part 2. Okay. Nominated for Best Cinematography, loses to The Towering Inferno. And nominated for Best Film Editing, which it also loses to The Towering Inferno.
But that big old blockbuster didn't have good sound.
The Godfather Part 2, Chinatown, The Conversation. The Conversation didn't win Best Sound.
So, okay, I there's a couple things that come to mind as you're going through these nominations. The first is, and I think it's kind of interesting to compare the way the Academy embraced Towering Inferno, and now, many, many, many years later, seeing how some films are being embraced. Your Top Gun Mavericks. Again, I love Top Gun Maverick. I just think it's interesting that back in 76, is that when this is?
74.
76? 74? Towering Inferno is kind of anointed, right? Like, they kind of go like, you know what? These fucking disaster movies, they might be onto something. Now, quickly, that disintegrates, right? Because they make too many of them and they turn it into a fucking cottage industry of just shitty B movies and what have you, right? But it takes this long for us to get to a place now where, like, you know, yeah, your Black Panther gets nominated a few years ago. It's looking like perhaps Angela Bassett finally wins an acting award for an MCU movie. You're seeing Avatar 2 get nominated. Like, my point is just that it is interesting that the Academy has taken huge swaths of time between embracing certain subgenres, your Lord of the Rings, your what have yous. It usually has to make a staggering sum of money for them to acknowledge
I
it,
think,
but it is
I think you're right, because like the other thing is with Top Gun Maverick, you know, it's not just, people like to say like, well, it's a throwback to this. The other thing is Top Gun Maverick is we are in a wave of legacy sequels, and Top Gun Maverick is the best legacy sequel in a good long while.
It is. Yeah.
Towering Inferno was like this disaster movie that had this all-star cast and all of that, and it's just
it is interesting is all I'm saying, that like the Towering Inferno felt like, is Towering Inferno, does it precede the Poseidon Adventure?
I think it's after Poseidon Adventure.
I think so. So
interesting. It is fascinating to me that we had this moment with your Poseidon Adventures and your Towering Infernos and even Earthquake for fucking costumes.
Yeah.
What the fuck is that?
I've seen Earthquake. I like Earthquake. Would never ever you could disembowel me and I wouldn't be able to tell you that the costuming was one of the 10 best things about Earthquake. I would be like, oh god, I don't know, Charlton Heston dies. That's crazy. Talk about the costumes, asshole.
Hang on. This isn't. Oh wait, no. Hang on. I'm on the wrong category. I'm trying to verify this.
Oh.
I could be.
Uh-oh.
I could have.
Did you fuck something up? Did I
swap it around? I don't know. Yeah, I definitely got that completely backwards.
Oh, way to go, homework boy.
Yeah, Gatsby wins costume and Earthquake wins sound.
That makes way more fucking sense.
Wait, Thank you miserable bitch.
Yeah.
I was just like, Earthquake, I don't know, man.
I know.
Okay. But I mean, I do, as we do wrap this up, I'll say just as one last thing, though, which is I do think that you brought this up earlier in the podcast, you know, the Great Gatsby versus Chinatown of it all.
Yeah.
The Bob Evans sort of having these two movies happening at the same time. Who directs Great Gatsby ultimately?
Oh,
forgive me.
Wow. Let me double check.
Is it Irwin? I think it's. I don't know why I want to say it's Irwin Winkler, but that's probably wrong. It's it's someone anonymous to some degree.
Jack Clayton.
Yeah,
the guy who directed The
Innocents and Room at the Top, and Something Wicked This Way Comes.
Sure. It is just interesting how, you know, you have this revered piece of literature. You know, Bob Evans obviously known for sort of wrapping his arms around beloved books and sort of turning them into these, more times than not, turning them into great movies. And this one just totally gets away from him. And I don't know if it's because he starts to realize that Chinatown's the real horse he should be betting on. And he starts to, you know what I mean, maybe pay less attention to Great Gatsby. I don't know. But it's just interesting that both these films coming out in the same year. You know, obviously Chinatown blows it off the map, but you know, in a different year, I wonder if Great Gatsby might have risen more to people's esteem.
Well, with that, Phil, I want to thank you so much for joining us again, for kicking off another season of our show, for our kind of annual tradition. Do you have anything you want to plug?
Yeah, a podcast like it's 1992. I don't know when this episode is dropping, but I'll just say that Podcast Like It's 1992 is starting on February 1st. So I don't know, you know, if that's whatever, but people should be listening to it. I would love if people would check it out. Me and my brand new co-host Emily St. James are going on a journey through 1992, and then I have a Patreon. Patreon is Podcast Like It's Double Features. Each week, I bring on a guest and we compare 2 movies, 2 episodes of television, or 2 songs. And it's been a blast to do so far. And people can subscribe there at www.patreon.com/podcastlikeits. And they can follow me on Twitter at PM Iscove.
Well, Phil, thank you so much for coming on. We will see you again next season. But everybody else listening, stick around. We'll be right back with our picks for the National Film Registry.
The National Film Registry isn't some fixed object, frozen in time. It's always growing, adding new titles every year. These annual selections are made by the National Film Preservation Board, with members and representatives from organizations like the Academy, the DGA, and the AFI coming together to debate and decide. But they don't just pull titles out of thin air. They pull from the public, people like you and me, who can submit their nominations for the registry in the form on the Library of Congress's website. What we do, at the end of every episode, is have Mike and Tom pick films not yet in the registry that they feel should be, inspired by that day's topic. At the end of each season, those films will be formally submitted to the National Film Registry for consideration on behalf of You're Missing Out. The only criteria? It must be an American film that's at least 10 years old. Here are today's picks.
Well, my pick's pretty easy. Came to me pretty quickly. Not gonna get into biggest rigmarole with this one. It's mentioned in the episode. We talk about the director. I'm putting up 7. I really don't, I don't know how it's not in the registry. For all intents and purposes, it's the first movie from David Fincher, one of the biggest, most influential and important American filmmakers of the last 30 years. It's still a masterful neo-noir that really takes the darkness inherent in the ending of this movie, Chinatown, and says, "Hold my beer while I cut your wife's head off." It's an amazing script. It's one of the best scripts of the 90s. Probably the best script not written by Quentin or the Coen brothers. It's one of the most visually arresting movies still. One of Brad Pitt's best early performances. Morgan Freeman kind of cementing his status after Shawshank kind of catapulted him to superstardom. It's really just like, it may not have the political thing that Chinatown has, but I think it trades in the political aspect for a more deeply humane, cynical yet optimistic outlook, which Chinatown doesn't have. Like, Chinatown is just outright cynical, like everything's going to end poorly, where at least 7 has that, I think the world's a fucked up place and I think it's worth fighting for. Well, I agree with the second part, or whatever the quote is. I don't fucking care. I think it's crazy that 7 isn't in the registry. And is there a Fincher in the registry? There's none, right?
Not to the best of my knowledge, no.
Because not to spoil my thinking, I was thinking of either 7 or Zodiac, and I saw Zodiac's on the list.
No.
The only if 7 or Zodiac's not on the list, the only thing I could think of is Fight Club. So I mean, like, I don't. Yeah, he just doesn't have a movie in the registry, which is kind of crazy to me. So I think 7's the best pick in that regard.
You mentioned that your pick 7 does not have the political thing that Chinatown does. Well, the political thing is exactly where I went when I was thinking about this. And I was thinking of a different kind of neo-noir, and one that takes a look at a different period in history and its own political corruption. It's a film that, to the best of my knowledge, it came out, and people who saw it in 1992 were like, "Oh, this is a really good movie." And then it fell to the wayside, sort of got forgotten, and it was one of the first films released by the Criterion Collection once they decided, after much internet to do, once the Criterion Collection recognized they had a very poor showing when it came to directors of color, and particularly black directors. The film I'm talking about is called Deep Cover by Bill Duke, stars Lawrence Fishburne and Jeff Goldblum. It is the epitome of, in the same, it's also dealing with Los Angeles, right? In this case, it's an undercover officer doing a sting to try and bring down a Los Angeles drug cartel, and Jeff Goldblum is the leader of this drug movement. And he goes through all of the processes of trying to take this down. And in the same way that Chinatown ends with that, "Forget it, Jake, it's Chinatown," like the system's corrupt, in this, it's dealing with kind of that Iran-Contra adjacent idea of like, we're spending all of this money and expending all of these lives of law enforcement to try and bring down drug dealers, and then the drug dealers are basically given immunity because they're working for the CIA. It was one of those films that I like many people who were a little kid in the 90s, I saw Deep Cover because of the Criterion disc, and I was just blown away by it. It's a remarkable neo-noir film. It's also a really stirring indictment of American law enforcement's relationship with drug dealers and the drug trade at a time where all of that information is still very, very fresh. This is not, in the way that like Chinatown in the 70s is going, oh, you won't believe how corrupt things were decades ago. This is like, no, this shit is still happening right now. So I would love Deep Cover to get the National Film Registry.
Let's all go to the lobby, lobby, lobby.
Thank you again to Phil Iscove for joining us. Next week, Micah McCaw from the McCaw Podcast Universe joins us to discuss Alfred Hitchcock's Shadow of a Doubt. Don't forget to follow the show wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you again next time. Here on You're Missing Out.
They honor movies of historical, cultural, or aesthetic importance on the National Film Registry.